Hello, my name is Keegan,
My name is Keely.
and welcome to History from Horseback. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, as we are welcoming a guest onto the podcast.
Our guest has been with the NATRC going on 37 years and has been the executive director for over 8 years. Prior to that, she served on the National Board of Directors for 3 years, with 2 of those years as the vice president and rules chair. She's been a horsemanship judge for 10 years and a leisure judge since the beginning of the division in 2020. She has over 5,400 competitive miles, earned the Polly Bridges Open National High Average Horsemanship Award, 2 national championships, and multiple national placings. She has served in just about every volunteer role in NATRC, from managing rides to being on the PR teams, and she's passionate about the sport. Please welcome Sarah Smith.
Hi, guys. I'm glad to be here with y'all.
We're glad to have you.
Truly very excited about today. I am usually the one who learns the most on the podcast, I feel, and I feel like today will be no exception. So I'm very excited.
Well, I'm excited too. We're going to have fun.
Okay, to start, I have heard people describe a love for horses and horseback riding as a happy disease. It's something that seems to be in our bones. How did you first get started with horses?
Well, that's kind of a funny question for me because I have loved them since I could say the word horse, which was pretty young. It definitely runs in my blood. My great grandfather and my grandfather were both horsemen. But unfortunately, my parents were absolutely not horse people, which is ironic. We were on the farm and we had livestock and we had all of that. We had hay, we had everything else, but my parents were not horse people. I begged them for a horse for a long time, but they were not into it. But then my dad's coworker, she said, "Why don't I help you out in that department?" My dad was not exactly excited about that, but then he decided, okay, we will do it. And so my dad's coworker gave me my first mare, a nice little Palomino mare named Nikki, and she came to live with us on the farm. And from there, I learned how to ride mostly bareback because I did not have a saddle that fit me. And so
That's
I
incredible.
Oh yeah, it was the best way to learn to ride because my
Yeah.
balance is amazing. So then they finally got a saddle that fit me, and I'd ride within a 20-mile radius of the farm, and I would not come home until supper time, and I could tell time by the sun because we didn't have, as little as 1980 something, like
No
86.
smartwatches.
Yeah, no
We didn't have,
smartwatches.
I didn't even have a wristwatch, so.
Yeah, yeah.
I just knew by the sun what time I needed to start heading home, and I could gauge my mileage. And I'm like, oh, I need to turn around and head home, and I would be home before supper. That was my rule. So, but yeah, that's how I learned how to ride, and that was how I got started with horses.
Just out of curiosity as well, that must have been the best day of your life, getting news that they had finally cracked and that you were going to get your first horse.
Oh, I was thrilled, and I didn't think it was real, but and then I was never inside the house after that. I mean, not that I wasn't before either, but I was out with my horse all the time after that. I was a happy, happy little girl.
That would have definitely been the dream for me as a kid. And,
Yeah,
and I loved
100%.
Palominos, so I mean, I still do, but
And the joke was I had blonde hair, so I matched my horse.
oh, that's great.
That's so good. That's the dream, really. When did you get started with NATRC?
So the ironic thing was the same woman, the same coworker of my dad's, she was involved with a club called NECTRA, which was the Nebraska Endurance and Competitive Trail Ride Association. And this club was the group that sponsored a NATRC competitive trail ride, and actually more than one, a couple of different competitive trail rides with NATRC in Nebraska. And so she actually was the one that introduced me to the club as well as the sport of NATRC. And she was the one that hauled me to the rides. She took me to my very first competition, which you see at the time you had to be 10 years old in order to get started in the sport. And I wasn't quite old enough when she first gave me Nikki. So I went to meetings with her and to fun rides and parades and different fun stuff. And then so then I turned 10 in March of 1988. And my first competition was actually the Rock Creek Station trail ride a month later in April of that year. And so,
Wow.
and that was it. I was hooked, but I fell in love with it instantly. And I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be stuck in an arena. I wanted to be blazing those trails, and that was it.
Yeah.
But and then she took me to I went to 3 rides that first season. She hauled me to 3 competitions that first season, and I just absolutely loved it.
Wow, that's really cool.
It's
Well, and
really cool
just
to have someone who's willing to take you like everywhere and
especially, yeah,
whatnot.
you think about the
Yeah.
responsibility of taking on someone else's child and
Mm.
their, and hauling them and their horse. And I mean, we were, camping for an entire weekend. It's not like you're just taking them for an afternoon.
Yeah,
She was
exactly.
hauling me and my horse, and we didn't have a fancy living quarters. That was back in the 80s when all that stuff was really non-existent. We had a little 2 horse bumper pole, baby, like powder blue, the little front white, part on the front was white, and she had a little what was it, a 70, I guess a 76 Ford truck. And I mean, that's what we that's what we went in, and we slept in the back of that truck because she had a camper shell on the back of it.
Living
And
the life. That would have
I
been
mean,
so fun.
that's that's what we went in. That's what we slept in, and it was great. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's
It's like
be clear, you
that.
barely sleep before your first ride
Yeah.
anyway.
You don't. That's true. You don't. And my feet, I always had trouble with my feet getting cold, and so she'd take, like bread bags, and she'd put them over my socks, or she'd stuff them in my little cowboy boots, and
There is really something to be said about like that sort of community feeling, especially when you're getting into something so new and people are so willing to bring you along and get you into it to,
yes,
share a love of what they do. I think it's really
yeah.
awesome.
Well, and that's kind of just how NATRC is in general. So
Yeah, that's
it,
awesome.
yeah, it just spilled over the rest of my time with NATRC. So yeah, it's
And I
awesome.
can I can only imagine that at some point you have paid that forward probably onto many, many people like around the community as well. Just
Yes.
on like a small tangent. Like I can only imagine the knock-on effect that comes from doing something like that.
Yes, absolutely. You'll find that in any ride camp.
Yeah.
Somebody missing a piece of tack or needs a new saddle pad or their stirrup leather broke, and you'll see anybody within the camp like, "Oh, I've got an extra one," or "Oh, I've got 3 halters in my trailer," or it's an awesome community. Everybody helping one another.
Do you prefer saying NATRC or NATRC?
Well, it depends who you ask, but I will say it both ways, honestly. So, and so will the bulk of the members.
Okay. I was just curious because
Yeah,
I've mostly heard NATRC, and that's at least easier for me to say than the entire initialism.
I know. I know. It depends on who you talk to. Some of your sticklers will say, no, it's NATRC.
What is NATRC? Can you briefly describe what a competitive trail ride entails?
Absolutely. So, the North American Trail Ride Conference, we're a nonprofit competitive trail riding organization, and we're comprised of 6 regions across North America. We're focused on safety, sportsmanship, education, and trail horse care. And we offer a plethora of rides and clinics across the country to learn and grow. And through this, riders develop a greater partnership with their equines. And that's what I love so much about this sport. We're a distance sport competition over a measured trail, and that's completed within a window of time. So we're not a race, which is one of the things that I always like to clarify, that we're not a race. We are measured against a certain amount of distance and time. We're open to riders 8 and above, and we welcome all equine breeds. So, bring those mules, bring those mules. We love
Yeah.
mules. Actually, one of our top President's Cup winners was a mule. We actually had two. The same lady rode two different mules to President's Cups. So pretty awesome. We offer a variety of divisions, traveling different distances and speeds to accommodate equines and riders of all experience levels, fitness, time limitations. Horses are evaluated on condition, soundness, trail maneuvering, and manners. And our riders are evaluated on horsemanship regarding equitation as it pertains to the trail and good care of the distance equine. So, we're not looking at riders as they would be in a show ring or, a showmanship class. We're looking at how are you riding in a way that protects the horse and takes care of the horse for a longer distance? Will your horse be sound to continue the next day? That's what we evaluate.
I think one of my favorite things from the couple of rides I've been to has been seeing the variety of tack and breeds and just styles that everyone has. Um,
Absolutely.
I last ride I went to there was a mule and it was very cute.
That's
I
so
love
cute.
mules.
We are a melting pot. That's the thing about NATRC. We are a melting pot of equines and riders. Our riders come from all different types of backgrounds, professions. It's really interesting when you sit and you talk to our members. You learn so much about different things. I mean, we've had a professor of Japanese, to lawyers, to doctors, to welders, to farriers. I mean, we have everybody. It's awesome. A lot of teachers, nurses,
Hmm.
and the same with equines. Our horses are, and mules, they're incredible. They're not just doing NATRC. A lot of our equines are out there participating in so many different disciplines, from the show ring to roping to reining and all kinds of incredible things. So we have very diverse equines and very diverse riders. It's really cool. So I always encourage people, hey, talk to one another, get to know each other, because not only do you get the excitement of getting to talk to different people, but it's a networking opportunity. So that's one of the things I love about our sport.
Yeah, the first horse I got to ride was somebody's drill team horse. And he
Awesome.
he was great. Though he it was funny because I like did a little I went to a clinic and we did kind of a little ride on the clinic day. That was only like I don't know, like a 20-minute ride. And he was just like poking along. And then I was able to ride with someone more experienced during the actual ride. And he, all of a sudden, he was like, "Oh, it's go time. All right." Um, he was
He
very
knew.
good, but like he was actually picking up the pace a little instead of just like poking along, like, I don't want to go any faster.
A whole different gear.
Hmm.
He knew his job.
Yeah, yeah. He knew what he signed up for.
Yeah, he took
He's good.
very good care of me. He was great.
It's great.
So, when and why was NATRC founded, and when was the first ever ride?
Well, NATRC has a really interesting history that really started with a ride. And that was the Concord Mount Diablo ride, which was hosted by the Concord Mount Diablo Trail Ride Association. And it actually shows that the record of this ride, the first time this ride was held, was Labor Day weekend of 1940. And there really wasn't a lot of formal records on this that I could find, but 1944 had a formal record that had 43 starters and 35 finishers, and the ride was approximately 41 miles over 2 days. So it was really interesting seeing that. But what was interesting to me is that what was commented on the most was that there was the noted remarkable difference and improvement in the horses that were entered in the 1944 ride compared to the previous 4 years. And it was attributed to the fact that the riders became better horsemen and horsewomen through the judging comments that they received from the previous rides. So then this led, of course, to the educational foundation of NATRC judging and the practices that remain in place today. So And that was 1940 through 1944. And then you think fast forward to 1961, because 1961 was when the North American Trail Ride Conference proper actually became a formal California corporation. So that's quite a bit of time between when that first ride or those first rides were actually happening to when NATRC became a formal corporation. And that was following a meeting that was held at the Concord Inn in March of that year. So then in that year of 1961, there were 5 California rides that were scheduled, with the first official NATRC ride being held at none other than the Mount Diablo ride, which was April 15th of 1961. So then following that first season, then that's when they started doing yearly awards, and those were presented following an annual meeting, which then became an annual event that we now recognize as our national convention. We've got a very lengthy history. It's really cool.
Um, so were rides still going on between like the 1940s to 1961?
Actually, no, that's a good question. But it was only that Mount Diablo ride, and it was an informal event that was only held
Okay.
by that Trail Rider Association, and they held that annually. So, but that became the basis for what then transpired, what actually became NATRC later.
Okay. Yeah, very
Yeah, I
cool.
must admit that when I asked that question, I was not expecting 1944 as the answer. That is for sure. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
So we've been, our official history technically begins in 1961 as an organization, but
Yeah.
the history precedes that much farther.
There've always been people who wanted to do this.
Yes. And I think that it's so cool that it was already recognized how important good horsemanship was, that was
Mm.
recognized way back, even in the 40s and 50s. And then that became a part of the foundation that still exists in our organization today.
Cool. It seems that NATRC rides are put together out of a love for the sport, as there is little to no monetary profit involved. What do you love about competitive trail riding? What makes it different from other disciplines?
So it is true that much of what we do as managers and volunteers, and quite frankly, even as riders, is out of love for the sport. I mean, none of us gain financially from the sport, and I think most of us would talk about how much we actually invest, because it's not cheap to travel across the country to rides, especially if you're campaigning for special awards of any kind. It's not a cheap thing to do. Managers know that it's an investment to get a ride off the ground. But what I can certainly say is that my investment personally has been beyond worth it, from the lifelong family that I've gained being a part of this sport, and the experience and knowledge that I've received for being a part of it. And for me, it's become my career. So, how many people get to say that their hobby is their career? How cool is that? I
Yeah.
feel pretty lucky. But, NATRC has taught me so much about my horse, and just as much about myself. I've learned, when you're covering those miles and you face some challenges, but you also get a lot of rewards, you learn a lot about yourself when you're kind of dealing with some challenges out there, and it tests you. So it's definitely a growth experience too. But the things that I've learned in all my years and experience with NATRC, they've led me to success in other areas with my horses, and just in different places in my life. So not even just with horses, but in other areas with volunteerism and in the community. So I have to thank NATRC for a lot of different things that I've gained, because I've been a part of it for the better part of my life. And I know that other people have had similar, they've had similar gains as I have.
On the other side of that, just out of curiosity, has it made things difficult sometimes, or like have you ever had to like seek out sponsors for things or anything like that?
Yes, we do. So being a nonprofit, especially, and we've always had sponsors over the years, and that's just something that most nonprofits end up having to do. But
Yeah, for sure.
we've had wonderful sponsor support, and that's been incredible. But with the sponsor support, we have it for both our on a national level, and we also have it on a local level as well.
I just want to say that, like, yeah, the last couple of times that I've done it, I mean, I was really nervous going into it because I didn't really know anyone. Like, I had kind of connected with some people through like some Facebook groups. I had never met them in person, and I don't know, I had never done any kind of like actual shows other than some like fun barn play days before. And so I was like, I don't know what this is going to be like. I don't really know what I'm doing. And everyone made me feel so welcomed. And it really is like a big family, like a community. Like you can see everybody greeting one another and being happy to see each other and helping one another out and kind of collaborating rather than, even though it's competitive, it really is like you're competing against yourself and the like trail itself in a way. You're not like it doesn't feel like you're competing against other people quite as much.
Yes.
Um, and I really liked that.
Well, it's different in the fact that it could be anybody's given weekend. You might have a strong competitor, but we all know horses, we ask them to do something really cool and they're going to show us, haha, not today. You know? So it really it can be anybody's game in any given weekend. And so you really are just competing against yourself and hoping for that better performance with your own team, meaning you and your horse, because you just never know. And weather plays into it, trail conditions play into it. There's so many things. And what if your mare's in heat that weekend? Or, what if who knows? There's so many things. Maybe your gelding didn't get enough hay and he's mad at you, but there,
Maybe they just woke up grumpy.
yeah, exactly. So, there's no reason for people to necessarily do anything other than be supportive of one another because it's like we talked about earlier, nobody's winning any money out of this deal.
That gives me a really good segue into, do you have a favorite story from a ride?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I do. Well, really, because I'm gonna shame myself in this story, but or humble myself. I don't know, however you want to call it, but uh, it's my favorite story because it's pretty funny. But I was going to travel to a ride down in Texas. So I'm in Nebraska, and my friend Helen, I traveled with her quite a bit later, but it was going to be her first out of region ride. And so she was excited because she was, glad to have someone to travel with to an out of region ride for the first time that had experience traveling out of region rides because I'd gone to a lot. And so I was going to, show her the ropes. So I'm like, okay, this gonna be good. And so we were traveling, and what happens is I have a blowout on the trailer, like 20 miles from camp. I'm like, oh, great. So change the tire, get back on the road. Of course, I had to replace the spare, and luckily there was a discount tire not too far. So we got that taken care of. We're heading into camp, and I can see out of my mirror that the door to my living quarters is swinging.
Oh,
And I thought, oh my gosh, no. I knew my riding boots were like right by the door, and I had this really special boot jack from that was my grandpa's that had been right by the door, and I thought this is bad. So I knew I had not probably latched the living quarters door properly when I'd left the when we changed out the tire, and so I quick get out, panicked, and thank goodness my boots and the boot jack were still there, but it was just like, oh, this is not good. We get
Flash of fear.
Yeah, it was awful. We get parked into camp, and then like that Saturday, there was a big tornado that like raged through the area, and it missed our camp, but like damaged the town nearby.
wow.
And I mean, it was like kind of like one of those weekends where if something could go wrong, it was going to go wrong. And I had a couple of like little electrical issues on my trailer. And then I was on Sunday, I was out on the trail. It was the same trail I had ridden the day before. And Helen and I got separated. I was ahead of her. And so we got separated by like 10 minutes. And they had this open loop and I got stuck in it. I was somehow
Oh no.
down and
Oh, no.
I circled it like 3 times because I kept coming out on this. The only reason I knew that was because I kept coming up on this burnt out stump that my horse kept spooking at every time I came up on it. And so I knew, I'm like, oh my gosh, I swore I was in the twilight zone. I swear it was just like I'd been like beamed up somewhere.
Surreal.
And I'm like, I gotta get out of here until I found like the first possible exit I could find, and having no idea where I was exiting to. But I'm like, I just gotta get out of this loop. And then I ended up coming into the pulse and respiration check from the wrong direction. But at that point, I was so far behind the rest of the open class that the PNR chair called me because they knew I'd been at the front of the class
Mm.
like earlier. So they called me and said, "Where are you, Sarah?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea." So when I came into the PNR backwards, they're like, "Yeah, okay, we're just gonna good." I was so far behind. I had to hand gallop the rest of the way into camp because I
Wow.
was yeah, I barely made it. I made it with probably 30 seconds to spare, not being late.
Well, at
I
least
did
you,
make it and
yeah.
not late.
I know I was I was gunning. I was guns a blazing, running into camp. And but we made it. And so it wasn't, needless to say, it wasn't the best ride. Well, then we timed out after rewards. We left camp because we wanted to drive, at least make it part way to a camp in Oklahoma because the drive
Mhm.
was quite far. Well, because of the all of the tire issues, like I only had a quarter of a tank of fuel in my truck because there was a fuel station not far from the camp, so I wasn't too worried about it. Well, because of the tornado, all of the
Oh
pumps
no.
were
No.
down, and I thought, oh, this isn't good. And were driving, 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 and by the time we finally, we turned in I don't know how many pumps. All of them were down for miles, for like probably 60, 70 miles. It was awful. And then finally, we cruised into a Bucky's, and I was 15 miles from empty on my
Wow.
eight. That's a little too close for comfort. But talking about the NATRC community, one of my fellow friends, Johnny, she wasn't too far behind me, and she had a extra diesel can in her truck, and that was where I learned always travel with an extra diesel can in your rig. So, and then we were almost to the camp in Oklahoma when I had another flat on the trailer.
Oh my God.
And it was about 11 o'clock at night in the middle of Oklahoma, like rural Oklahoma. And I'm just, oh, this is great. But
When it rains, it pours.
yes. And so I thought, here you go, Helen. I hope you learned wonderful lessons from me this weekend. And I really showed you the ropes. I'm such a great mentor for you.
Oh. Well, at least then I almost feel like that's nice because then you get to see everything go wrong and see how you fix it, or at least how you just keep on going, rather than like everything goes really smoothly and then next time when something does go wrong, you're just like completely unprepared for it.
Yes, that's true. But
The silver lining, you know.
Yeah.
it was a,
But
it was
also, what if everything just went perfect all the time? Please.
well, being around horses, that horses and some of your horse experiences will humble you.
Definitely have other plans on some days. I
Yes.
remember in there's a quite a difficult, not like a difficult horse, but like there's a mare at my riding school who, when I was first put on her, she was described to me as a little bit, marish, which I didn't really understand at the time, and still to this day think is just biased. But she humbled me when I first got to her. And I had never ridden a horse like her, but she's also like a standard bred Clydesdale cross. So she was like 2 feet higher than me. And when she put her head up because she didn't want the bridle on, I was like, well, it's not happening. She doesn't want it on. I'm not tall enough. I'm not tall enough to do anything about it. And yeah, she absolutely humbled me that day. And I remember my instructor, and this is like probably close to almost a year ago now. But my instructor came around the corner and she was like, "Are you ready to come out?" And I was like, "I can't get the bridle on." She was like, "Oh yeah, she'll do that. Like she knows." She was like, "You just have to you have to actually tell her that you're putting it on. Otherwise she'll know. She can smell the beginner on you." And I was like, "Yeah, she can." Like I know that now. But I tried her again like 2 months ago and she was a total sweet baby angel for me. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, maybe she can't smell the beginner as much anymore."
That's a great story.
Yeah, her name is Holly. She's absolutely beautiful and I love her. And these
Oh,
days I get so excited when I get to ride her these days. But yeah, I do remember that day where I was like, "Oh no, I'm still very much beginner. Like I have no idea what I'm doing."
now you can watch other beginners do their first attempt, Holly, and a
Yeah.
bridal.
Yeah, and be like, "Oh, I remember that when that was me."
Everybody needs an attempt with Holly.
Yeah, every day's a school day with Holly. I promise everyone that.
How has NATRC changed or progressed since its founding?
Well, I could go on for days with this question because NATRC has, well, imagine, I mean, we've been around for a very long time. And so there's been a ton of evolutions. But I'll just kind of I'll go back to our history and just kind of do some basic stuff. But we started with 5 rides in 1961. And then in 1963, we had 8 rides. But up until that time, we were just solely in California. And in 1964, we added Arizona. In 1966, then that area, the California and Arizona area, were split into 2 regions. So we had the Northwest region, which became Region 1, and then the Southwest region, which became Region 2. And interestingly enough, it wasn't until 1968 when we officially became a membership organization and established a board of directors with 9 members. So, we had several years where we didn't even have a membership. And then in 1969, then the right to vote was granted to all members. And then at that time, the board increased to 12 directors. And at that same year, national championships were added. So 1969 was a pretty big year. We still are in a 12 board member status today. But it's kind of interesting how we had all of those years where we didn't even have a membership base, and then all of a sudden it exploded, and we had memberships and votes and a board of directors and a fully formed organization by then. 1971, Region 3 was established. So that's like Colorado, New Mexico, that area. And then 1976, regions 4 and 5 were created. So that added like Texas and the whole Midwest, and region 5 was the southeast portion. So when that happened, the sport just really evolved and spread like wildfire. It wasn't until 1982 when Region 6 was formally created and actually split away from Region 4. So we split away from like Texas and Oklahoma. It's like, ooh, we seceded. We seceded from Region 4. But it was just the fact that we were growing so much that we needed to divide. We needed to divide up the membership and the competitive regions as well. So originally, our rules, uh, we didn't just make up our rules by ourselves. They were actually patterned after what was called the Green Mountain 3-day 100-mile ride that was in Vermont. So this model actually required better horsemanship and better equine care for success. So many of the rules were then incorporated into our initial drafting of our original NATRC rulebook. And then, of course, since then, our rules have evolved. I mean, a lot
Mm.
since then. I could go on for days about our rule evolutions. And, a lot of folks that would have written back when I started in the 80s, and then especially even in the 90s, if they were to read a rule book today as compared to the rule book that they wrote under in the 80s and 90s, I think they'd be shocked at the changes because we have changed so many things from our shoeing regulations and rules to stabling and even horse handling at night. It used to be you couldn't touch your horse after 10 p.m.
Hmm.
until the vet judge came around in the morning. So we've had so many different things that have changed in our sport. So when it comes to rules, and that's been really interesting. And being a part of the National Board of Directors, you get to see all of that in action. I always encourage members, be a part of your board, sit in on the meetings. It's really interesting to watch your board in action. We had multiple changes to our divisions over the years. Originally we started with one division. We just had an open division, and that was it. And so, but at the time, like pleasure rides were offered along with the sanctioned rides. So if there was horses and riders that weren't ready for that competition, they could still ride a pleasure ride that was being hosted alongside the sanctioned competition. But it wasn't too long after that the novice division was then added to replace the pleasure rides. So that was one of the first evolutions in divisions. Then much later, there was great debate about where experienced competitors and judges competing could start new young horses, because there
Mm.
was a lot of debate about, oh, we don't want judges competing horses in novice. That's not fair because that's where our beginner riders are. And um, we had what was called uh, horticore, which is basically the same as our current day distance only. And so we had a lot of riders doing that and not actually fully competing. And they didn't want to be able to do that. They wanted to compete. So then our competitive pleasure division was established, and that was in the early 90s. And then you fast forward to where we are now, where we established the leisure division, and that was in response to a lot of things. COVID, declining memberships, which, a lot of recreational organizations for equines were experiencing a hit in memberships because people are busier, society's busier. They don't have time to necessarily go out and condition a horse to go do
Mm.
50, 60, 100 miles, so
Mm-hmm.
the leisure division was our response to that, because it's a lot easier to condition a horse to do an 8 to 12 mile ride at a more leisurely pace than it is to condition a horse to do 50 to 60 miles in a weekend at a faster pace. So we developed that, we piloted it for 1 year, and then it was implemented in 2020, and that really took hold. And it is now 50% of our ridership, because it answered the call. It's kind of our what I call our in and out design, in that ride structure, where people can drive in that morning, compete, and still leave that same day if they need to. But
Much more
it's,
flexible.
it's much more flexible, in addition to usually requiring less conditioning time. So it just fits busy families, busy people. It's just, if they want to do one ride. So a lot of ride venues are offering back to back. So if they want to ride Saturday and Sunday, they can. But if they only want to ride one day, they can choose which day they want to ride, what fits into their schedule best, and they can do so. So it just really offered an opportunity for people to ride when they wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
I know I really liked it because like right now I'm dealing with like some health stuff, and so I really can only do like 1 day of riding right now. I like my own personal conditioning. And so it's nice to be able to just do the 1 day. And then, I have the option that I can do a second day if I want. But like so far I've been like, yeah, no, I shouldn't push myself too hard and do like a second day and then just be completely out of it the next week. So,
Right. I mean, you have those choices. And that's nice. And it's because you have that, you're probably more inclined to come because you
hmm
get a choice as opposed to being locked into knowing you have to ride an entire weekend in order to compete.
hmm
And that's kind of been the response to a lot of people. And the other piece too is we have had people that were previously retired from the sport with either aged horses or simply aged riders whose bodies couldn't handle the rigors of CP open, and they've come back and they're riding leisure again because they can handle that. They can handle the distance and that speed. So it's been really awesome seeing that, seeing them come back and ride again and just even be a part of the leisure division. But one of the other things we've seen change over the years is the progressive changes to our awards structure and system. Previously, our main award system was focused around the open division only, and we only offered national championships to open. But then that evolved, and we expanded national championships to the competitive pleasure division. But more recently, we now have awards for the novice division on a national level. And then we also, just this year, new, the leisure division is eligible for national awards in 2024.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so we are really working hard to make sure we are rewarding all levels of competition, and we continue to revisit that and look at that and figure out how can we best serve our riders, and we'll continue to evolve because that's what keeps organizations alive, keeps us fresh. And when you look at our history and how far we've come, I have no doubt that we will continue to do that and grow.
Out of like pure curiosity, what does the process look like for, if a rule change comes about or if there's things that need to be adjusted? Like, how does that process start or even, finish?
Well, it's not an easy process. It's not a short process. And it shouldn't be because you don't want changes to just be knee jerk, of
Hmm.
course. And all of our rule changes are run by the membership. So the membership gets a say in what we do.
Oh, that's
So
cool. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So any rule proposals are brought to the national directors. So typically if members have suggestions, they bring them to their respective national directors in their region. And then their national directors can then bring that to the national board at large as rule proposals. And then it goes through our rule proposal process. So, and it's, like I said, it's a lengthy process. So we're actually getting ready to meet next weekend. The national board will be meeting, and we will be looking at rule proposals for 2025. They will be introduced. And at that time, the national board then will look at all rule proposals and determine if it's something that we need to carry forward or not. And then from there, if it's carried forward, it goes into various discussions. It's proposed. Then, if it passes for discussion, that goes forward to the membership. And so then it'll be discussed at rides. So the rule proposals will be discussed at rides with riders. They'll ask for opinions. We usually do Zoom meetings that are open to each region. So we'll have one in each region for the membership to ask questions of their national directors about rule proposals so that they're aware of them and can, if they have concerns or comments, they can ask those. And then we formally vote on those in July to pass or fail them. And if they are passed, then they get put into the rule book.
It's a really great way to do it. And it's awesome that everyone gets to have sort of like a say and like it gets so thoroughly sort of vetted before even being considered. It's a wonderful way to do things, in my opinion.
Yes.
So, what can people do if they're interested in the sport? And can they participate without their own personal horse? And, how could they get in contact with people?
Well, I always tell people one of the first things to do is to visit our website at natrc.org. There's a ton of information on there for all divisions, for all types of rides. our ride calendars on there for every region. So it's kept current. So anything that is up and coming will be posted on there, as well as our clinics. I highly encourage people to attend a clinic. So if that option is available and feasible for you or anybody, go to a clinic, because it takes some of that anxiety out of the process when you get to not only learn more about the sport, but you also get to meet people. You get to meet, uh, current riders. You get to meet other people that are new to the sport and maybe have some of the same questions that you do. You can meet people that could potentially mentor you, because I think that's a wonderful thing, is if you can get connected with an NATRC member as a mentor to ride with and learn from, or just someone that you can even message back and forth with your questions prior to a
Mm,
ride,
for
tips and tricks
sure.
because we love to share our sport. And and no, and you do not have to ride your own horse. We have a lot of people. I mean, Keegan, for example, competed someone else's horse, and I have ridden, I can't even tell you how many different horses I have ridden that don't belong to me. I ride a lot of different people's horses and have over the years. So it's very common to see people competing other people's horses. They can be leased, borrowed, whatever. That's a very common thing.
It'd be
Um,
really great for someone like me, for example, who has no access to that sort of thing on my own and could not make it happen at any point in time soon. But yeah, I mean, the distance is a little bit of an issue, but we'll get around that.
just, fly over for each
I mean,
ride.
put it this way, if I was ever in the States anytime soon, I would absolutely be looking into doing something like this. One of the things that I've made a point to do in my travels across the world was that I've ridden a horse in every country that I've been in. And 100% this would be something that I would look into doing. It's like right up my alley. Like it's so low pressure and everything's like, it's fun. You get to do it with friends and people who are just like, people who want to be there. And I think that's like the most exciting thing about it, is when you're with people who are so passionate about what they do and so willing to bring other people into it, and find any way to help them along with it. It's really awesome.
And I mean, it's like if you are a competitive person, it's something that can be as competitive as you want it to be. Like
Yeah.
you can, push yourself, push your team to try and make like a certain amount of miles or get,
Absolutely.
going for those prizes. I do have a follow-up question of what if you don't want to ride a horse? Are there any ways you can still be involved?
Absolutely, Keegan. That's probably the best question, because these rides, these none of what we do happens without volunteers. So, you know, that's honestly one of the greatest ways to learn about our sport as well. Uh, if you're apprehensive about riding and getting your toes in the water by just climbing on a horse, come volunteer. You will learn a ton by coming and volunteering, because we need volunteers in so many different capacities at rides. And it takes quite a few volunteers to make these rides happen. But one of the easiest ways is to show up and help on the PNR crews. We always need PNR workers, and you can learn a lot by doing that. You have a great opportunity to talk to a lot of different people. Our PNR crews, are usually made up of a lot of different people, from family members of riders to experienced competitors that are just not riding that weekend. And so you can learn a ton that way. You also usually have the opportunity to talk to other ride personnel while you're at a PNR. You often see judges at a PNR, so you can see a lot when you're there. Uh, Being a judge's secretary is, it's a lot of work. I'll warn you, it's a lot of work, but you can learn far more about a ride and equitation and anything about a ride. You're going to learn a ton by being a judge's secretary. So that's definitely a great volunteer position if you have the opportunity to do that. But yes, volunteer. Even if you can go volunteer for a day, go down and do that. But if you can be there for an entire weekend, that's even better. But volunteers make our sport go around. So if you can be there, do that.
And plus, they usually feed you. And usually the food's pretty good.
They do. Volunteers
Very exciting.
usually get fed, and that is a wonderful thing.
My first ride was really kind of unplanned. I originally was just doing the clinic in Waco, and at that clinic, it was super interesting because it wasn't just about the sport and how to be in a ride. It was also they had a farrier there who talked all about like hooves, and I learned so much. And they had one of the like vet judges there talking just about in general, like all sorts of equine like first aid. And so I learned a ton, not just about like the sport specifically, but also just about horses in general. Um, and then literally they're like, "Oh, well, you're here already. Why don't you just ride tomorrow? And we have a horse for you." And I was like, "Okay, you've convinced me."
That is so fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm glad you had that opportunity.
Yeah, it was really cool. Do you think you could describe the different divisions a little bit of just like what the differences are between them?
Yeah, so we have our open division, and they are our most challenging division. So they range usually 50 to 60 miles in a weekend, and they go a faster pace, averaging about 5 miles an hour. So it takes a little more training, a little bit more conditioning. And then you have the competitive pleasure division, which is typically our more experienced teams, but they don't want to go the pace and the distance of the open division. And so they'll go the same distance as novice, typically. So the 30 to 40 mile range. So novice and CP typically go the same mileage, but also the same pace. So we're looking at 30 to 40 miles, and they're going to average anywhere from 3 to 4 miles an hour, 3.5, 4 miles an hour. And then you have the leader division, and they are 8 to 12 miles, but then they average usually 3 to 4 miles per hour.
And then I guess there are like some differences in what is judged and what isn't, right? Between like leisure
Yeah.
and all the
So
others.
So judging with open, the open and CP will have more challenging observations just because of their experience level. So judges will have higher expectations of both the riders and the horses. And with your novice, they'll still have the obstacles, but they might be a little less challenging or might have less components to them. And then leisure is unique in the fact that they are judged as a team. So with open, novice, and CP, you have a judging team. So there is a horsemanship judge and then there's a veterinary judge, and they judge independently of one another. So you have the horsemanship judge that evaluates the rider, and then you have the veterinary judge that evaluates the horse. And they get separate scores and separate scorecards. So those are, they're uniquely scored. You get separate placings for the horse and the rider, separate points systems. They qualify for separate awards at the end of the season and the end of the year. And then your leisure division is unique because you are evaluated as a team and you have one scorecard and one judge for the entire ride. And on that scorecard, the horse gets 5 points per evaluate, like per obstacle, and the rider gets 5 points per obstacle for a total of 10 points per obstacle. And so everything's evaluated together. And so if your horse doesn't do so well, that can bring your total points down. Or if you don't do so well, that can bring down your total points. And so it really makes a difference when you both do really well. And it's pretty awesome. The other thing too is our open novice and CP. The scoring system is based on a negative scoring system. So you start with 100 and then points are deducted from that 100. But the leisure division is the opposite. It's a positive scoring system, and you accrue points throughout the ride. So it's
Ah.
really it's really interesting. And eventually we would like to have all of our systems based on a positive scoring system, but we started with our leisure division as it being a completely new and independently judged system. And so we started our positive scoring system with that when we developed it as a completely new division.
That's interesting. Just I
Yeah, I
feel
was gonna
like
say.
I feel like it is a little easier, I think, for people to understand if they're first coming in, like a positive scoring versus they're like, "What?" I was like, I'm just getting points taken off all the time.
I
Like,
know. You feel like the bad child in school, like, no. You see all the red marks on your scorecard, like, oh, that's devastating.
yeah.
Yeah, we get that comment a lot. Like, ooh, my scorecard was just bled all over.
No, no. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time to talk with us today and to
Absolutely.
share about the sport. I know that I personally can't wait to ride in another competition, but I do feel like I need to condition myself and my horse a little bit more.
Well,
Ace needs a little bit of miles on him.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad you're with us and that you're riding. That's a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you featuring NATRC on here and sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're both interested in. We're both like we like trail riding, we like being out there more than being in an arena, even even though it's I mean it's like a necessary thing, but
Yes.
I felt that this would be kind of a perfect topic for us.
Well, and
100%.
Keely, if you get over to the States, you need to time it with one of our rides, and
It is
we can
at
get
the
you
top of my list right now. I'm like, if I go over,
the
I've got a list
horse.
of things to do. It's in my top three now. And as well as the fact that, like, I know I don't need my own horse, not like I would be able to bring one for 2 weeks from Australia anyway.
No, no, we can get you on a horse over here.
I'm sure I will have the best time.
Well, and Keely, that makes me think of the fact that a lot of our competitions are on private ranches and even some of the ground, like state parks and different places we ride, we have special permission to ride in areas that horses are not normally allowed. But
Yeah.
often we're on private ranches that are not normally open to the public. So
I can only
sometimes
imagine it's just the most beautiful country out there as well, too. So
So we're often on places that are not normally allowed for the public, and there's some opportunities that are pretty amazing.
Hmm.
see, now I'm all excited. Now I'm like, okay, this trip next year, maybe. Let's see.
Well, that would be really cool. At some point, I feel like we will
I'm
meet in
sure.
person.
I'm sure. Well, and if not, because I judge, so I usually end up
Oh,
somewhere.
okay. Well, then I'm just gonna be like riding up to you and you'll be like, go do a side pass over that log. And I'll try not to panic.
So you'll be fine. I'm a fun judge. I like to have a
Oh,
good time.
okay.
So
Okay.
I smile a lot and have fun. So
All right. Yeah, I mean, I haven't come across a mean judge.
I try to keep things light and
No
fun.
dressage, no dressage judges around here.
No,
No. I just
no,
love when a couple of times they've been like, "All right, ride your horse up to me," and I ride up to them, and then they're like, "Oh no, you're off the path. You need to back up in a straight line." And I'm like, "You called me over here."
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Like,
no, devastating. You'll
no,
have to do this
oh
maneuver in front
man.
of me.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Uh,
such a great way of doing it.
yeah, yeah. They're fun.
So all of our Keely, just for your knowledge, all of our obstacles, everything we do is based off of natural terrain. We don't use anything artificial, no artificial methods. No,
Nice.
you're not going to see pool noodles hanging from
Yeah.
trees
Yeah.
and big rubber duckies and weirdness. It's everything is natural, and we'll use trees, logs. It's
Built in.
yeah.
I mean, it makes cleanup a whole lot easier and way, way
Yeah.
more enthusiastic to ride.
Well, I mean, the whole point is it's not just about safety, but it's about relevance.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not going to encounter pool noodles out on the trail.
I
So,
can't imagine.
we're looking at, can you navigate your horse out of a bad situation on the trail if you need to? And that's
Yeah,
why we're looking for that positive body control, that partnership, that communication when we're judging. And so we're going to use natural terrain. And can you manipulate your horse's body around that tree or up that bank and backing and side passing and just using that natural terrain or that tree? We're not looking at crazy stuff.
Think that's it. Well, yeah, I guess I already thanked you, but thank you again.
genuinely, this has been awesome.
It's
And
been a
yes,
lot.
I did learn a lot.
It's been a great time. I've enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you for listening to History from Horseback. If you are interested in learning more about NATRC, you can visit natrc.org for information about the sport. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you like what you heard, please consider leaving a rating or review. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you out on the trail.